Former President of Honduras, Juan Hernandez, was captured by national law enforcement agents on Tuesday after the issuing of a warrant for his preventive detention by the natural judge attending his case. After days of buildup and heightened fears of a full-scale war, Russian forces deployed along Ukrainian borders returned to their bases. In Ethiopia, the House of the People's Representatives approved the decision of the Council of Ministers to lift the state of national emergency. Hi, this is From the South. I'm your news anchor, Diego Martin, from the teleSUR studios in Havana. We begin with the news. Former President of Honduras, Juan Hernandez, was captured by national law enforcement agents on Tuesday after the issuing of a warrant for his preventive detention by the natural judge attending his case. Police escorted the former dignitary out of his house with chains in his hands and legs as part of the huge operation that involved dozens of agents, vehicles, and even a helicopter in a nearby area in case a politician attempted fleeing his house. This is all part of the extradition process requested by the United States, who decided to launch a full-on case against Hernandez for large-scale drug trafficking operations in that country. The current Honduran administration and many allied parties had been denouncing the corrupt practice of Hernandez and his acolytes for years. With his capture, the Ministry of Security of Honduras disclosed that Hernandez is to be kept under guidance of surveillance and safety protocols, and that his human rights are being fully respected. In an exclusive interview for teleSUR, human rights PhD Joaquin Mejia pointed out that former President Juan Hernandez is the head of drug trafficking in Honduras.
Hernandez and his gang, even before entering politics, they made a decision to enter politics in order to control the state and to put key people in institutions of justice and security sectors, to be able to flood the noses of gringos with cocaine. Secondly, what has also been pointed out by these authorities in the United States is that Juan Hernandez is the capo of capos. That is to say, he's the head. He's not just any drug trafficker, but at this moment the United States has reached the head of this criminal structure. Thirdly, Honduras has become a narco state.
In addition, Mejia stressed that after 2009, the coup d'etat in Honduras, criminal organizations infiltrated all state structures.
What is happening in Honduras is something old and that arose after the coup d'etat of 2009, when there is a collapse of institutionality, and in that context, a collapse of and removal of institutionality. Organized crime organizations took advantage of the situation to occupy all state structures. In fact, Juan Hernandez has been a key person in the process of the deterioration of our institutionality and the strengthening of organized crime within the structures of the state.
Forensic experts on Monday started exhuming the remains of at least 7 victims, mainly children, of a massacre committed by soldiers in El Salvador 41 years ago. They were among nearly 1,000 people slain in and around El Mozote in the country northeast by soldiers who accused the village of aiding leftist guerrillas in El Salvador's bloody 1980 to 1992 civil war. Silvana Turner, the head of Argentina's Forensic Anthropology Unit conducting the operation with Salvadoran colleagues, said her team is working to identify the victims using DNA technology, as the remains were buried in 2 mass graves, which difficults their identification. The El Mozote massacre, which lasted for 5 days in December 1981, was the worst episode of El Salvador's internal conflict. It resulted in over 75,000 deaths and more than 7,000 people missing. The United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA, confirmed that in 2021, forced displacements in Colombia increased by 181%. Covering the entire year of 2021, the United Nations Office recorded a 57% increase in the number of forced displacement emergencies, in which at least 74,000 people were forced to move from their territories of origin. According to research, the most affected places were the departments of the Pacific of Colombia, Chocó, Cauca, Valle del Cauca, and Nariño, where 75% of the emergencies due to the massive displacements and confinements in 2021 were concentrated. The report also confirmed that the cause of forced displacements was the presence of intimidation of legal armed groups against the civilian population. The International Criminal Court refused to carry out an investigation against the former president of Bolivia, Evo Morales, for alleged crimes against humanity pushed since 2020 by representatives of the de facto government of Janine Áñez. José María Cabrera, Attorney General of the government of Áñez, appeared before the criminal court to file a complaint against the former president and the organizers of the road blockades. It was finally determined that the alleged conduct denounced against Evo Morales does not satisfy the contextual elements of crimes against humanity. The then prosecutor accused the former president of deliberately cutting off the passage of medicines, but the prosecutor, the current one, concluded that although some protesters acted recklessly, the leaders urged them to let the medicines pass. This decision implied an adherence to the Roman statute. We'll take a short break now. Please join us again after this. Hi, welcome back to From the South. After days of buildup and heightened fears of an alleged full-scale war, Russian forces deployed along Ukrainian borders returned to their bases. In a statement, Igor Konashenkov, a spokesman for the Russian Ministry of Defense, said troops that had recently been posted to Russia's southern and western military districts, which share a border with Ukraine, had completed their military drills and therefore will return to their bases. Konashenkov also announced that troops currently engaged in military drills in neighboring Belarus, which shares a border with Ukraine to the latter's north, would return to their permanent bases when the exercises ended on February 20th. He added that military exercises would continue elsewhere in Russia, and a live fire drill was scheduled to go ahead in Belarus on Saturday, while naval drills are still underway.
As the combat training measures are completed, the troops, as always, will make marches in a combined way to the points of permanent deployment. Units of the southern and western military districts, having completed their tasks, have already begun loading onto rail and road transport, and today they will begin moving to their military garrisons.
Talks between Russian President Vladimir Putin and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz began in Moscow Tuesday, the latest meeting in weeks of diplomatic efforts to defuse tensions over Ukraine. Scholz's meeting with Putin comes a day after he traveled to Kyiv to shore up support for Ukraine during talks with President Volodymyr Zelensky. The meeting also follows a visit to Russia from French President Emmanuel Macron last week. The German leader expressed concern over the need to talk about the situation regarding security in Europe. The Russian president said that energy issues would also be on the agenda. Western countries have warned Moscow that they could impose sanctions on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline if Russia attacks Ukraine.
We're ready to work further together. We're ready to go down the negotiations track, but all issues are, as stated earlier, should be considered as a whole. Do we want this or not? Of course not. That is exactly why we put forward proposals for a process of negotiations.
German Chancellor Olaf Scholz welcomed Russia's announcement that some troops deployed near Ukraine would be pulled back as a good sign toward easing tensions.
Exhausted. The task now must be to work resolutely and courageously towards a peaceful resolution of this crisis. That we are now hearing that some troops are being withdrawn is in any case a good sign. We hope that more follows.
The United States temporarily closed its embassy in Kyiv, the Ukrainian capital, and moved its embassy operations to Lviv, a city much farther from Russian territory, citing an alleged dramatic acceleration in the buildup of Russian forces at the country's border. Staff at the U.S. embassy in Kyiv had already been drastically reduced after the U.S. ordered the departure of most diplomats and halted consular services. A small representation had already been put in place in Lviv, about 70 kilometers from the Polish border. With no grounds to sustain the claims of a Russian invasion, the United States strongly urged its citizens to leave Ukraine and ordered some personnel and their families out of the country. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said in a statement that it will move most of its diplomatic staff in Kyiv to Lviv, but not all, indicating that it will keep the embassy operating with Ukrainian police protecting the compound. A Spanish fishing boat sank off Canada's east coast on Monday, killing several of the 22 crew members on board. Rescuers saved 3 crew members and were continuing to search for survivors in the area of Newfoundland on Canada's Atlantic coast where the ship sank. According to Spanish media reports, 12 crew members are Spanish nationals, 8 are from Peru and the rest are from Ghana. The 3 survivors were found in a lifeboat suffering from hypothermia. Rescuers found 2 other lifeboats empty and were looking for a 4th. The fishing vessel was based in the port of Marin in Galicia and belongs to ship owner Manuel Norris.
After a Galician fishing boat became shipwrecked in Canada, we would like to convey that the government is following the search and rescue missions for the crew with care and concern. We are in coordination and in a permanent contact with these rescue services, that we can confirm that 3 crew members have been rescued, but I cannot provide any other information, and I ask you for special care in your publications, since their relative, I suppose, they are also continuing to pay attention to this event.
In Hong Kong, overwhelmed hospitals set up outdoor wards. More than 1,600 new daily infections were reported Tuesday, and the figure hovered over 1,000 for much of last week. 2 Hong Kong hospitals began placing patients in beds outside their entrances as medical facilities struggled to cope with the city's worst coronavirus wave to date. Before the current outbreak, Hong Kong treated all coronavirus patients in dedicated isolation wards. The territory's leader, Carrie Lam, has vowed to stick with the current zero-COVID approach, even as she rules out a mainland China-style hard lockdown. The new wave with the Omicron virus variant has battered the city's capacity for testing, quarantine, and treatment. On Tuesday, thousands of nurses walked off the job in Australia's largest city, Sydney, protesting against staff shortages and pandemic-related stresses and strains. Defying a strike ban, thousands of nurses decked in scrubs and surgical masks marched on the state parliament over what they say are intolerable conditions. Throngs of nurses cheered, clapped, and chanted their anger at persistent shortages of hospital beds, equipment, and the grinding toll of this long-winded crisis, while also demanded better payments and working hours adjustments. For 2 years, Australia's medical staff have worked under strict COVID protocols while trying to carry out day-to-day tasks and roll out an unprecedented vaccination program. But recent months have seen an explosion of coronavirus cases, bringing more patients and depleting the ranks as staff get sick or are forced to isolate.
We deserve better. We need more staff on the wards. Our patients aren't safe. Most of the time the staff are overworked and it's stressed, and it's just not fair. It's not fair. We don't ask for much. We're asking for it to be fair.
We've been struggling. A lot of our nurses have been burnt out, doing doubles, struggling every day.
In Mexico on Tuesday, there is a third consecutive week of decline in COVID-19 cases, with figures above 40% and even the last one of 48%. In a press statement from the National Palace, Subsecretary of Health Hugo Lopez-Gatell explained that the intensity of occurrence of new cases is below previous levels, and only 1.6% are active, as opposed to the 8.9%, which was the maximum reached in the current fourth wave. He also noted that in terms of optimizing the treatment of the pandemic, a clear reduction in hospitalizations is observed, with fewer people to treat per available beds. Mortality also fell, with a sustained tendency in the 32 federal entities, including the capital. We have more news coming up after a final short break. Please stay with us. Hi, welcome back. In Ethiopia, the House of the People's Representatives approved the decision of the Council of Ministers to lift the state of national emergency. Ethiopia's parliament on Tuesday lifted a state of emergency imposed last November when Tigrayan rebels threatened to advance on the capital. Parliament went to a vote on Tuesday to lift that decree, which was opposed by 63 of the 312 lawmakers, while 21 others abstained. The state of emergency was declared on November 2nd after Tigray Popular Liberation Front fighters seized 2 crucial towns about 400 kilometers from the Ethiopian capital, Addis Ababa. Israel prevents Palestinians in the Gaza Strip from receiving medical treatment outside the coastal enclave. Non-governmental organizations denounced that last year 15,000 requests were submitted to leave Gaza in order to receive health care, of which 38% were rejected or received no response. More than 4,000 of such requests concerned minors, and at least 3,000 were from people over 60 years of age. The non-governmental organizations recalled that the health system in Gaza has collapsed due to the blockade by Israeli troops, and that under these conditions it is impossible to attend to the needs of the patients. Afghans in Kabul took to the streets on Tuesday to protest against U.S. President Joe Biden's recent decision on frozen Afghan assets. The more than $9 billion in Afghanistan's foreign assets were frozen after the Taliban takeover, but now, last week, Biden signed an executive order that promised $3.5 billion out of $7 billion of Afghanistan's assets frozen in the United States to families of 9/11 victims. The other $3.5 billion would be freed for Afghan aid. Afghans across the political spectrum have decried the order, accusing the U.S. of taking money that belongs to the Asian country's citizens. About 3,000 Afghans in the capital protested against Biden's order, carrying banners calling Biden the world thief of 2022.
This money belongs to Afghanistan and the Afghan people. We will not allow anyone and any power to decide arbitrarily on the money which belongs to Afghanistan's people, Afghanistan businessmen, and Afghanistan's banks.
The coastal Madagascar town of Mananjari was left largely destroyed after tropical cyclone baes passed around. Recently, more relief supplies arrived by plane. The storm left 120 people dead, mainly on the east coast of the Indian Ocean island nation, which took the hardest hit. According to a French Red Cross logistics officer, initial evaluations undertaken showed 9 out of 10 homes were damaged by the cyclone, especially around Mananjari. The National Disaster Management Agency said the majority of deaths were in the Congo district, also near the east coast. The agency reported as well about 125,000 people were in need of aid after baes struck 1 week ago.
In the impacted areas, that is to say, in the Mananjari region, and where the cyclone hits, 80% of the houses were damaged or destroyed. So it's a huge amount, and we have almost 130,000 people waiting for their houses to be rebuilt. We send shelter, tool kits, habitat reconstruction kits, tools, shovels, pickaxes, hammers, spikes, everything you need to rebuild local habitats. We also give tarpaulins.
The United Nations estimate that the oil spill in Peru will affect the country's coastline for at least 6 years. A mission of 11 United Nations experts presented the country's executive with a preview of its environmental report, in which it has described the situation as the most serious disaster in the nation's modern history. According to the report, the oil spill at the La Pampilla refinery managed by Repsol will affect the environment of the country's central coast for between 6 to 10 years. The experts have proposed to draw up a list of those affected as well as an environmental monitoring plan in order to determine actions to help those affected by the spill. The final report is expected to be delivered within the week. The devastation caused by earthquakes in Haiti requires an investment of more than $1.9 billion to reactivate the southern region of the country, where almost 1 million people suffer all kinds of shortages. On August 14th, Haiti suffered an earthquake of 7.2 magnitude. Its epicenter was located in the department of Nippes and left more than 2,000 people dead and 13,000 injured. This Monday, at a press conference, Émilie Prophète, Minister of Communication and Culture, emphasized the importance of rebuilding in the area highly vulnerable to extreme weather events. As a result of the earthquake, more than 1,200 schools were severely damaged, with serious consequences for the more than 300,000 students who benefited from these facilities, as well as for the patients of the 97 hospitals and health centers that were seriously affected. Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro launched on Monday a plan to expand gold mining in the Amazon rainforest, drawing criticism from environmentalists for bolstering an industry accused of rampant deforestation, pollution, and attacks on indigenous peoples. Bolsonaro signed a decree creating the program to support development of artisanal and small-scale mining, which presumably aims to strengthen policies and stimulate best practices. Artisanal mining, a controversial activity known as garimpo, occupies a legal gray area in Brazil. The measures prompted outrage from environmental and indigenous rights groups, which warned they would exacerbate the illegal destruction of the world's largest tropical rainforest and pollution of its waterways with mercury used to separate gold. We've come to the end of this news brief, but remember you can find these and many other stories on our website at teleSUR English. You can also join us on social media for all the latest news. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For teleSUR English, I'm Diego Martin. Thanks for watching.